Barb Higgins here, welcoming you to 1,000 Tiny Steps. In this podcast, I share my stories of love, loss, triumph, and tragedy as I continue to trace my steps backward and ponder what led to the death of my daughter, Molly. If you're ready to laugh, cry, shake your head in disbelief, or simply listen, and tie, buckle, slip on, or lace up your shoes, and join me as we begin our 1,000 Tiny Steps. Hey, everybody. Barb Higgins here, welcoming you to episode 76, 1,000 Tiny Steps. So as usual, before I get started, I have some fun little stories to share. Jack, Jingle Jangle, took his first dance class a couple of days ago. I wrote a blog about it, which came out on February 2nd, and he just had a blast, so we signed him up. And one thing I like, it's fun, people often ask me what's different raising Jack compared to raising Gracie and Molly. Some things used to be very, very rigid. Kids had to be potty trained to participate in everything. And potty training is tricky. Kids are very different. Molly and Gracie, you were supposed to be 3 to start dance, and you had to be potty trained. Molly started at 2 in a pull-up, and I just made sure she wore a little skirt. Gracie had a pull-up too. But you really were supposed to be 3. Molly was one of the only 2-year-olds. She turned 3 in April, but still, she started most of that year, she was 2. So Jingle Jangle Jack won't be 2 for another, 5 weeks, 6 weeks. And so he just loves to dance, and he's recently become obsessed with Gracie's tap cheese. And so I sent a little video to Cindy and Hillary dance. Cindy owns the dance studio, and Hillary's the teacher of the littles. Oh my gosh, so sweet. They're like, bring him in. So we brought him in, and he did an amazing job. He actually really did okay. So anyway, that's the good news. The bad news is, so I'm upstairs at my house. So I'm looking out my window over here, which you can't see. And I have this beautiful house next to me that used to have a wonderful family living in it. And now I have a family. I'm sure that they have wonderful qualities, but Dad gutted the whole inside of this beautiful 1855 farmhouse colonial. Oh my God, it's so sad. There was some beautiful woodwork in that house. And so all of the building demolition has just been sitting in the yard since May. It's plaster and insulation and all this. And so this is a major breeding ground for rats. He also has a lot of garbage out there. He has a dog, big giant dog that takes big giant poops. We now have a rat colony in our house. So the exterminator doesn't think it's too many at this point, too many rats. We are fighting such a losing battle. It's been since September, and we've called the city a couple of times, and we drove by, looks fine from the front. Well, yes, because the problem's not in the front yard, it's in the backyard, which abuts our kitchen and bathroom. So we found where they come in, and that's been closed up. We dug out this huge nest. It was disgusting, but it was all this stuff of ours, toys of Jack's in this rat's nest. So I've spent all day today just cleaning every toy Jack has and scrubbing the kitchen table and washing everything and wiping everything down. And every stuffed animal right now is outside on a blanket, and I've sprayed them with Lysol and turned them over and all this, and they'll air out. I just am horrified at the thought of, I was sleeping in the living room when all this was going on, which means I'm sound asleep, and they're coming in and taking toys from Jack's out of the living room. That's my life right now, the best of times and the worst of times. That's just kind of how it is. So this episode, it's been weighing a bit heavy on me because it was just such a turning point in my life. And, you have 2 people who are married, whether or not they're happily married, they're legally married, entering into a relationship that, really had no business existing. But we did it, and we can't undo it. And so this episode will be called Key Day. But I had really finished up 2008, 2009 school year, finally feeling on my level and with my girls and my job that everything was great. Things were not great with Kenny. Financially, we were not okay. He was in a place where I thought we were okay, and I would find out into 2010, 2011 how very unokay we were. So I felt like I really carried my family. I had a great paying job, a full-time school teacher, and I was entering my 20th year in 2009 in the district, and I was coaching 3 seasons a year. That's a lot of time away from Gracie and Molly. But I loved it. I loved the coaching. I loved the athletes. I loved all of it. And we needed the money. I had worked and worked and worked, and the IRS had taken so much. 2009 summer was interesting. We had a nice vacation. Kenny was working a ton, or so I thought, things were seemingly getting better. So Key Day was significant. And I mentioned it last time where it showed up at the house. I have to say I had, the whole dynamic of Amy's and my friendship was very much a trauma bond type thing. I've done so much research now in trauma bonding. I know there are so many words that become cliche. People overuse them. Some right now are narcissistic personality disorder, narcissistic behavior, gaslighting, trauma bonding. All of these things exist in this reality for me. There's all sorts of different medical mental illness diagnoses that I'm not qualified to make. But when you do research for a podcast episode like this, you really want to make sure what you say is right. And I have to say that, we don't judge people with a missing foot for walking slowly. That's how they operate. And we have so little understanding of how the brain works and how brain issues and trauma, responses to trauma can react and cause changes in behavior. So I need to be clear that I will own my piece. I will never, ever lay blame, 100% blame of what happened to me on Amy or Roy. I'm the one that chose to befriend both of them. That choice is on me. Does not excuse the behaviors that took place. Amy had moved away. She didn't live in Concord anymore, out of my life. My major concern was that I had no connection to Teresa or Morgan, and I was worried about them. At about this time that Roy was coming back, I did connect with a woman. She was a dance model who went to the same church, and I talked about that. And so as the fall went along, this was a connection that we had, and I could ask her how they were and how did they seem. And I remember as Roy and I spent more time together sharing that with him. But I digress and jump ahead. July 22nd was key day. A week later was my birthday. And I remember visiting with him, and I missed a doctor's appointment. I had a very kind of a busy birthday planned, and I just sort of canceled everything and spent the entire day just talking to Roy. And I had been warned, be careful, by my neighbors and by my mom. But I just felt, I could see, and I thought it was genuine, and I think part of it must be. But he seemed so utterly relieved and grateful that I was sharing with him. And I remember he was a pilot, and so he was based out of a different town. And so in that town, he lived in what's called a crash pad. It's like an apartment that several pilots and flight attendants and airport personnel that are stationed, whatever, their home base is not where they live. So if you have 3 or 4 days in a row, you can fly in, you work your shifts, you stay at the crash pad, and you fly home. And so he had several friends there, several of whom I am still connected to on Facebook. When he came back, we reconnected on Facebook, and I scrolled through his page to see, and he had these, volleyball games and partings with friends. He seemed to have put together a very nice life for himself in this year that he was away from his family. And Amy had done the same thing. And both of them had really taken the year to just find people. Roy dated a woman that whole year. He moved to Massachusetts, and he dated a woman that was in his town there. And they dated for quite a while, several months, I guess. I don't know, the course of that year. By the time it was summer and Roy and I were speaking, that relationship had ended. He talked about just how much it distracted him and how important it was for him. I had a hard time with Amy jumping into a relationship. I'm not one to speak about relationships. I've jumped from the frying pan to the fire. But when you heard what both of these individuals claimed around their mental well-being and their state of mind, relationships just seemed off to me. But, at that time I was married to Kenny, and that was my plan for the rest of my life, to be with Kenny. I didn't have any other ideas. As rough as things were, that's where I was at right there. But getting to know Roy, the month of August, we probably got together once a week. When he was coming into town, we'd meet and go running. And I remember I did a lot of running with Dave. And when I started running with Roy and Roy was back, Dave pulled back. I'm like, we can run together in the mornings, the three of us. And he was like, no, thank you. And I remember at the time thinking that was odd behavior on Dave's part. Like, what the heck? This guy's having a hard time. We've all had hard times. But people were just smarter than I was and really, really, really made good choices to stay back. So I remember running with my cross-country team, summer running mid-August to the end of August when school started. And we ran by his house one time, and I got a text message. I just heard you run, but I went out and looked. It's so great to see you running. He said, and so many compliments. And the Roy that I had known before all this was not all that nice to me. Now, he was being told things by Amy that when I found out what she had said were incredibly not true. I still think sometimes he chooses to believe what suits him at the time. But he shared all these things that Amy had said about me that were just completely not true. She said I hated him. She said I was hardcore feminist. Well, I think women and men should be treated with equity, but I don't know, I'm not a man hater. She painted this picture of me, and he blamed it on her. But he said, I really thought you were a man hater. And there were times when I would say something, just a statement, and he would bring that up again and again. But we started to spend a lot of time together. I have pictures. One of my profile pictures on an account is a picture of me sitting on the front porch of his house, and I have his computer in my lap. And we did this whole Facebook spread on, messing around on Facebook. So here's what I now believe to be a key piece. I had mentioned before that Roy is very savvy with social media. He spends a lot of time online. We did all these posts. Now, I was still Facebook friends with Amy. We did these posts, and we mentioned her name. And so she unfriended me, which was fine. But she could still see all these posts. I remember 2 or 3 times that fall, and there was some legal stuff, and her attorney and Roy's attorney, and then I'm sort of involved in this now because I had provided so much information around the children and the well-being of Teresa and Morgan. And Roy was working very hard to get visitation back. Amy was fighting it, incredibly fighting it. And so here's this man that is portraying himself to me as very wrongly treated, never deserved a restraining order, only agreed to it because his lawyer said it would be simpler, spent an entire year away from his children, which, again, I just don't find that credible as a parent. I just look at that as, that's not a selfless act. I think that's what he would say, but they had a horrible year, and whether he would have made it better or not, I don't know, but it would have been consistent. And this was all that was eating at me. And I had anger, and I was very honest with Roy about how I felt about all these things. School started, and now I was very busy, and he was, we just started to spend time together. I would, after cross country was over, if he was around, I'd go over and visit, and we would talk. And our conversations began to get a bit more personal. And then let's go for a drive. So I had to go to dinner. We'd go to dinner. And I was organizing homecoming. That month of September was incredibly busy for me. I was varsity club advisor, so I did all of it. Again, not knowing it would be my last homecoming. I spent hours away from Molly and Gracie putting on these amazing dances. I did so much to make it work. I was very busy setting all this stuff up, but I was out of the house in the evening. So sometimes I would finish at like 7:30 or 8. And I would stop by there, and he'd be alone in the house. And there was no furniture. So he was sleeping on a sleeping bag in a third floor room because it had a carpet. And I'm like, I have a mattress. I can bring, it was just an interesting setup. I didn't totally understand, but he was mostly cleaning up the house. He was finishing painting it so that it would sell. He needed to sell the house. And so, it was pretty clear he's just going to be there like 6 weeks. Once it got to be winter, they winterized the house and it hadn't sold. Get the water out of the pipes and close it up and turn the power, all that. We just started spending more and more time together. For the most part, I just felt like this was a man I had never, ever seen in terms of what I thought he was and how he presented. If the term love bombing means anything, he went all out to make me feel special. He said the nicest things to me. He would compliment me on everything I did. We would be having a conversation. He would interrupt me to just say how intelligent I was. And, oh my gosh, I didn't know all this. And so we started just spending all this time together more and more. And again, I was so busy doing all these, setting up and decorating and all these things for homecoming. July 22nd was key day. And I believe September 22nd, so 2 months. And we sort of took our relationship to the next level, and it became a romantic involvement. I can remember one of the things that stands out to me most in this is that whenever we were making a decision to take the next step, he would always say, well, what do you want? And I would say, well, it's not about me. It's what do we want? We're making this decision together. And he goes, no, I'm here to do what you want. And it came off as this sort of like, I'm very selfless and I just want to make you happy. Those statements came back to haunt me because it was very easy for him to then say, well, you're the one that wanted this. You're the one that decided this. You're the one that made this decision. One person can't make a decision in a relationship for both. And so we started this clandestine sort of love affair. Anytime I could, I was there. He was on a schedule, so he would come up like on Tuesday and stay till like Thursday, or he would fly Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, or, he had a very consistent schedule at the time. I can remember the week that we really connected. So we were texting back and forth. I had outdoor duty. I was sitting on a bench, and it was incredibly flirtatious. And our text messages had begun getting very flirtatious. I have a memory of coming back from the Mount Washington Invitational. I had taken the team up to run, and we went to the zip line at Cranmore. And then we came home, and I was texting him, and Ember was sort of reading over my shoulder. And she said, oh, Barbara, be careful. You have everything you need. Please be careful. Please be careful. And I wanted to be careful, but by this point, I was really, really getting drawn in. And someone like me, and I'm essentially insecure, and was ego-driven enough at the time to really, really accept the compliments. I've done this again and again, not just with romantic involvements, but with friends. My friendship with Robin and my friendship with Steph at the charter school, I'll get into those at some point, were the same way. And somebody just loves on you in this seemingly selfless way, and you commit to them. And by the end of September, I was 100% in terms of this relationship. I think now that Roy let Amy know that this was happening because nobody knew. I mean, we were spending time together, but outside of somebody that might have seen us together, we kept a lot of that off of Facebook, everything on Facebook. We had banter back and forth, but we were careful about, keeping it friendship level. But I remember seeing an email thread because there was attorney email threads, Roy would share all that with me. And Amy made this comment about to Linda that I was spending a lot of time with Roy and I was probably sleeping with him. Why she would say that at that early time, I mean, she thought that of me, so I could see where she would just think that anyway. But I'm thinking now that she knew Roy well enough to know that if he was spending a lot of time with me and I was helping out, there was probably a lot more going on. I see this now because Roy's and Amy's relationship now, their current connection and involvement, makes it pretty clear that as much as they didn't like one another, they shared what they needed to share with each other to accomplish what they needed to accomplish. And I know that sounds vague, and I apologize. September turned into October, and homecoming day, the parade, I had Gracie and Molly with me. We did the parade, we did the football game, and I brought them over where I was at the house to visit. And they had their little crowns on, and we walked all around, and they looked in the house, and they went up to Morgan's room where it used to be, and Teresa's room, and everything was painted. And I didn't try to hide that I was connected to Roy around his kids, because that was initially my main motivation. And then I got sucked in more and more and more. So as the fall went along, we spent a lot more time together. I would have a lunch break and we would meet at the bakery right near the high school and have lunch together. Cross country, I didn't have such great teams, so it wasn't like we were going all the way to the New Englands. And so, cross country practice would end and I would go right over to his house. And then when, October went along and we would just text back and forth all the time and talk on the phone and email constantly. We spent so much time communicating in all of them. Someday I'll compile the emails and just make the emails a book because I've reread them now. I don't recognize that version of Roy. That disappeared shortly after my job loss and when our relationship became very strained. But that year, 2009, 2010, the emails and the text messages were loving and supportive. We bantered back and forth. One significant thing happened is day-to-day life at my house was fine. They say that people who are happy in their marriages don't wander. And there was a lot I wasn't happy with. But my day-to-day life with Kenny was fine. We did well together. We still do well together. I mean, we don't get along so great right now because we have so much so much damage. It's hard to navigate sometimes. But back then, there were times we were working in the yard, we were raking and, setting up Halloween decorations. And then we were putting the camper away and we wiped everything down. And I looked at him, we worked together, we put the camper away. And all the time I just started sobbing. And he's like, "What's wrong?" I'm like, "I don't know, I'm having a bad day." And the reason I was sobbing is I looked at him and I'm like, "I don't want to do this. I don't want to leave my marriage. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do," because leaving my marriage wasn't even on the table at that time. But I knew that this relationship with Roy was snowballing down a hill very, very quickly. And I believed it was on his part too. I believed that he was desperately in love with me because that's what he would say. We did the I love yous. I think it was maybe mid-October, late October. In October of that year, our neighbor's house burned down and it was a Wednesday and I had taken my cross country team up Mount Kearsarge. We got back and there's a picture of me on the phone. I'm getting news from my mother. And so I went to Roy's and we spent the whole evening together. So we drove up on Auburn Street and looked down and looked at the fire and watched everything. We went to dinner. I spent the whole evening with him, simply saying that I was with my runners, at Mount Kearsarge. And this was the nature of my fall. Suddenly I'm just being dishonest. He doesn't really have anyone to talk to. He's still married, as is Amy. They're still married to each other, but she's living with somebody that she's engaged to. And, he doesn't have that connection. I'm the one that I still had this. I was living with my husband and creating what was supposed to be a happy family. It didn't take Kenny long to figure out that something wasn't right, that something was off. We weren't doing well. Our romantic side of our relationship had begun to really struggle because I was just so angry about the money and everything that was going on. Now, of course, I'm all swallowed up in this thing with Roy, and things started to get very, very tense at home. We have little places we back off for a couple of weeks, and then we'd miss each other and jump back in. He had an apartment. He was living in Massachusetts. So I had done all these, with my sabbatical, I had done all these workshops. And so Project Adventure is right near, it's in Beverly, Mass. And so I signed up for a 3-day conference and I said it was like a 5-day conference. And I went down and I spent all those days with Roy. And I remember he has a picture of me sitting at his table with this beautiful card that he wrote about the fact that I'm sitting there at his apartment. He can't believe it. So we just had these days together. And I remember I just was so swept in. He was just so kind to me and loving. And we would find all these things we had in common. The one thing I loved most about him, aside from everything at the time, He was curious. He liked to go to museums. He would read, not fiction necessarily, but he was always curious about things. And he liked architecture and art. And there's a guy named Andy Goldworthy, and he builds things out of stone, just beautiful things. And we watched this video, like a video on TV, all about his farm. It's in upstate, Storm King, I think it's called. It's in upstate New York. And we fell asleep on this couch, the purple couch. It was like all these jokes. And we fell asleep. And it was one of those sleeps where you're half awake, half asleep. And I was just so smitten. I remember every feeling now. And I know sharing this, a lot of you listening will think, how can you share this? It's just going to be so hurtful to Kenny. And Kenny knows all of this now. We've talked and talked about everything that went on during all those years and what happened to us. And because in analyzing the events that led up to Molly's death, we both analyzed everything that was going on in our lives. And Kenny and I were in big trouble. And Molly and Gracie were just young enough that their life was still just happy. And I had such a troubling, traumatic childhood. I just wanted Molly and Gracie to be happy. So my conundrum from the beginning in this venture was that if I were to end my marriage and move in and start a life with Roy, I would have to uproot Gracie and Molly, which I did not want to do. It was very clear he did not want to ever live in Concord, New Hampshire again, but there was no way that I was in my mind that I could uproot Gracie and Molly. But again, I'm stepping ahead to what would happen in the many years we were together. October turned into November, turned into December. So we had a second visit. And during that visit, we celebrated our Christmas. And this was a time that I started to realize that oftentimes Roy would set a stage and give me my role. And I would do what he asked. And then he wouldn't participate at all the way that I thought he would based on what he wanted me to do. And so let me explain this. So we had our first Christmas together, and we decided together, he decided actually, we're not doing big Christmas, just get something small for each other, just something small. So I made him a CD of Mozart, the Four Horn Concertos, because that's my favorite. Mozart is a huge piece of my life. And I gave him a Christmas ornament, a blown glass ornament that my mother and I each had one. And I gave him mine, and I have my mother's still. And it's a beautiful blown glass Christmas ornament. And then I gave him an ornament that had belonged to my great-grandmother. And it was back when Christmas ornament, you could go to like the local pharmacy and buy them, right? Like a 5 and dime. It's a brand that's not made anymore. They were these beautiful little ornaments, and I have them all. They were my great-grandmother's. So I gave him one of those because he appreciated like history and things. Oh, and I also put a picture of me and I made a sticker, like a label, and put it on the CD. And so I went and I gave it to him, and he opened it up and everything. And he loved it. He bought me a violin, an expensive, beautiful $700 violin, because I love playing the violin. It's a stress release for me. I just was dumbfounded. And I'm like, you said nothing big. So we resined up the bow, it didn't play well. It wasn't tuned because it was brand new. So, I didn't play much, and I hadn't played in years. When I started playing it a lot, though, I just started playing that violin quite a bit. I got music and started playing. I had played the violin when I was teaching at Walker School. The music teacher, Ben Green, just used a school violin, and I played with the kids. I performed in the little concert at the school. So I remember just sort of feeling a bit put off by that, like a little off-kilter, like, there's nothing. Well, it was not nothing. It's a beautiful violin. Molly used it when she was in Fiddler on the Roof. We had a wonderful time. We went out for dinner. Every visit included going for walks, beautiful places right on the water. And he took pictures of me, so many pictures. And I realize now that he took pictures of everybody. And it was around this time, August, in the fall, he has a really good friend, another Bob in his life, who's also a pilot. And he was dating a woman named Rory. And it was clear when I would look at the pictures of the visits and excursions, Rory spent a lot of time visiting him. And this friend of his had a boat. There were all these pictures of them on the boat, 3 of them. All these pictures of Rory. And not just like random candids, but like posed pictures, leaning back, an elbow pose, in a bikini, all those sorts of things. So I remember just, my neck hair is rising a little bit. So I'm like, is this someone that you like? And he goes, no, I just take pictures. Well, she called him on the phone incessantly, all the time. But there were times when we had set a time to meet, and I would be calling because he was supposed to come get me or meet me. We were going to go eat dinner, and he wouldn't answer the phone. And he was 15 minutes, 20 minutes, a half an hour late. And he was on the phone with her, and he would just say, well, I couldn't just hang up. Well, yes, you can just hang up, actually. That's exactly what you do. If you say, look, I have plans now, I need to hang up. And they spoke a lot on the phone. It used to just irk me a little bit. And that continued all through the fall. I can remember more than once being down there and visiting him in Massachusetts, and the phone would ring and it would be her. So we had a couple of visits. And at one of the visits where I had the Project Adventure connection, Kenny calls me and he says, I have a weird voicemail on my phone from Amy's boyfriend. called me all these derogatory names, the queen of the sluts. And like it was this terrifying voicemail message. And I'm thinking, why is he upset with me? Like, why is he mad at me? Why is he calling Kenny and saying these terrible things? How does he know anything about me? Amy and I were not Facebook friends now. I think I had actually blocked her. There was no connection. What I assume now is that Amy and Roy communicated and I didn't know it. This guy, Bob, Robert, whatever you want to call him, knew things about me that I don't understand how he would know unless he heard them from Roy. So I remember being really, really upset, like really upset. And Roy's immediate reaction was, you should get a restraining order. So I don't need a restraining order. Let's just see what happens if this behavior finishes. But I don't know what action I took. I don't really know, but it was terrifying. And I was really upset. I maybe called him back and left him a voicemail on his phone saying, please don't ever call my husband again. If you have something to say it to my face. And it was one of those things. And all of a sudden, this guy, Bob, was like this arch enemy of mine. So obviously, Amy was saying horrible things about me and letting him know that I was this terrible person. And that's how she felt. And in normal terms, I don't blame her. In her mind, I dumped her. Now, remember, she got mad at me for going running with Dave. I'd been running with for years because she had had surgery and couldn't run. I'd replaced her with Dave. So I can imagine her mind and thinking about me being with Roy was not okay. But she was right. I mean, she was not wrong. So 2009 turned into 2010, and there was several huge blizzards. Roy had a way of, he would sometimes lead conversations in sort of a negative way. So when you hang up, you're anxious, like, wait, is everything okay? And so then I would start texting and he wouldn't answer back. And then be mad. And, it's this creating this drama. And that's called gaslighting. And gaslighting gets overused as well. It's not just verbal abuse. Sometimes gaslighting isn't even mean. You just state a fact that isn't quite right. Or you state a fact, you act a certain way. And when the person responds appropriately to how you presented yourself, you say, that's not what I said, or that's not. So Roy and I, so now it was 5 months involvement now, almost 6 months. And there were times when I really felt off kilter. The other thing that he did, once it was winter, he was just like, how are we ever going to see each other? Right? The house was going to be winterized. A business used his house, paid him money, paid for the heat to be on and the water to work and everything, all of this, to do like a magazine spread with furniture and fabrics and all this. So they set up this living room furniture and all these photographs. So for like 3 weeks, he could go up and all this stuff was there. And it was fun. I have a picture of me all dressed up because I was heading off to court with him. I think it was like December 11th or 12th. And I'm sitting on a couch, sort of making the pose. And I was going to go to the day off and went to court. I went to a lot of his divorce court hearings now. And I would see Amy there with Robert typically. And then it was us as well. Again, I did this because I felt like it would facilitate and speed up Roy getting to see Morgan and Teresa. And I actually, at that point, would have jumped off a bridge if Roy asked me to do it. I just was that smitten. And I would think that he was that smitten with me. We had an unbelievable chemistry, unbelievably intense chemistry. And I think that drove a lot of decision-making and everything at that time. So he would also just come up. The heat was low just to keep it set at, whatever, just so the pipes wouldn't freeze. So he would come up and had a space heater in the attic and he would sleep there with blankets and all this. And so I would go over all the time. And I'd have it's like January and I have like an open period. So I have a duty for 45 minutes, then I have a prep period. And I'd leave school and go over, talk about not doing the right thing. And I'd spend, that time with him. I would say, I have a doctor's appointment and I would leave and we would go to a movie. We spent hours together. I can remember one day counting it up from morning. We'd get up early and go running. And then I would see him during the day and I'd see him after school and I'd see him at night. And it was like a school day where I'm teaching for 6.5 hours. And I think I had like 6 hours with him in the same day. Horrifying. Like, what am I thinking? Why am I doing this? But I was taken at that time. Another thing that happened that was fun is we went skiing. So we were talking on the phone and we had decided that we would go skiing. And I remember I just loved impressing Roy, like having him be proud of me. And so we were talking about skiing and he goes, one thing I hate about girls, not women, he always refers to women as girls, is that they always say they can ski and then we go skiing and they can't ski. So we started talking about different places to ski. And I said, I only want to ski at Cannon. If you've never skied at Cannon, I need to take you there. And he's like, all right, Cannon. So I said, what I like is it's a hard mountain. It's challenging. It's not like a glitzy little ski area. The view is amazing. And that's where I really learned to ski. So he says, well, how many times have you been there? And I'm like, what do you mean? How many times have I been to Canton? He's like, yeah, like how many times? I said, in my whole life? He goes, yeah. And I'm like, I don't know, 150? And he's like, what? And I'm like, Roy, I know how to ski. Like, I know how to ski. And I remember I was so excited. He goes, oh my God, I can't wait. And so it just made me feel, I don't know. Right now I just look back at it and I think, how could I have been so, pathetic? But I believed him. It made me feel beautiful. And so we went skiing. I think we just met and skied for the day that time. So we had to drive a couple hours up from where he lived. I had a blast, I will tell you right now. And he loved Cannon. We skied there a ton of times over the course of our several year relationship. We skied at Cannon many, many times. I have a hard time going there now. I mean, I haven't skied. The last time I skied was with Gracie, but it wasn't at Cannon. But the last real intense, wonderful ski day I had that I really was happy was Cannon with Roy. So we had this amazing day and we went all the way. I said, no, we have to go all the way to the top and ski all the way to the bottom. I'll meet you at the bottom. So he was got down ahead of me, but not by much. And it was just like, what? We had this amazing day. He has a picture of a chairlift and it's this frozen chairlift with nobody on it. And it was our last run of the day. And I skied all the way down and I had to wait and wait and wait. And he finally came down. He had fallen. He had taken a tumble and he laid there for a while. And he looked at the chairlift and he took a picture of it. And back then it was a camera, not on your phone, little flip phones then. He had this digital camera and he took it out and took this picture. But these are the things I remember. Our time together, he just always did things to make me remember it as wonderful. And that's what I remember. His birthday is in February. And so I remember I got a big cardboard box and I wrapped it and it just told me all the things that he was missing, that once he wasn't paying all this money in child support and all these lawyer fees, once he didn't have to live in poverty anymore. He's a pilot. So I don't know, but I filled that box with things that he said he missed. Nice piece of pottery from Cobblestones, chocolate in it, and 2 magazines. One was called Architectural Record and one was like Architectural something else. And I got him a 1-year subscription to it because he loved it so much. And I put in there like all these, I just wrapped up several different things. Some of them were super expensive, but they were just things that I knew he would like. What I was expecting was this like grateful response. And he just looked at it and he said, this is nice, but in 2 years, you won't be giving me presents like this. And I just sort of looked at him like, it was weird. His initial reaction was to like insult the present. I'm like, well, just open it and look at everything. And so I have to say he did love everything, everything, because everything had a connection and a meaning and it wasn't lost on him. And I had written him a poem, it was just hours and hours together and hours I spent away. I tried to do it at times that Gracie and Molly weren't home anyway, that I wouldn't have been with them anyway. They spent a ton of time at dance, even though they were so young. They were on the competition team then. My mother was with them. And so it just worked. I was able to, carve out time to live this unbelievably double life. My biological father lived in Virginia at the time, and he was aging and getting up there, and I hadn't visited him for a long, long time. And so I flew down to Virginia to visit him, and I combined a Roy visit in with that. And Kenny sort of pieced that together. I think he knew that was going on. Kenny's just intuitive, and he knew. He also knew that our situation wasn't great. And so I think he was just sort of waiting to see what happened. I don't know, but it hurt now. I feel so bad. Also during this time, Roy started to build up a real hatred for Kenny and would name call him a lot. Now I'm like, you don't have to name call Kenny. He's not doing anything wrong. I mean, he was doing plenty wrong with our money, but it was just it was just this, it was like everyone had a role to play and that's how it had to be, but I didn't care. I just didn't care. And so we went all over DC. It was so much fun. And then we went all over Portsmouth, Virginia. We went inside this big museum inside a boat because it's right near Norfolk. Chesapeake is right near there. And we drove. And this was one of our first big fights. So we had 2 big fights in this early time. The first one was we went into Boston. It was the Christmas visit. We went to the Boston Pops Christmas carols. It was a blast. And we parked. We got out and he was driving. And I should have just driven because it was my car and I know how to get out of Boston. I could have, but I didn't. So he was just like, he gets very high pitched when he's yelling. So he's yelling. He's not talking in a normal voice. He's yelling. Where did he go? Quick, here we are. And so I just, turn left, turn right. Like, so we sort of got lost, which who cares? It doesn't matter. We're not in a rush. I'm like, stop yelling at me. I'm not yelling. And I'm like, you're yelling. You don't know yelling. You've never heard me yell. Now I will say when he's really yelling at the top of his lungs, when he's in sort of like a narcissistic rage type thing, it's much louder. But this wasn't, he wouldn't talk in this tone of voice to a police officer if he was pulled over or to a neighbor. He was angry and upset with me. And I just got very quiet. I just got really quiet and I just didn't say anything. And so we drove back to his apartment in silence and I just got in pajamas and we went to bed. And I also remember we were in bed. So, what was going on there? And I was real quiet. And he's just like, well, okay, whatever. And I'm like, no, I need the connection. I want things to be better. We were keeping a journal at the time. I'd write in it and he would write in it and we'd read what each other wrote. And so he wrote, there was a whole lot of sad last night in this visit and all that kind of stuff. So we talked about it, but here's the thing. Roy didn't want to talk about it. He didn't feel a need to apologize to me. I just said, Roy, I don't want to be sad. We need to process that. And he was, no, we don't. It's over. There's nothing to process. I don't want to talk about it. And I said, I don't want to fight anymore. I don't understand why you got so upset with me. I wasn't upset with you. I'm going to get upset with you if you keep bringing it up. And so you just stop. And that was how that was. And so, but what would happen once you agree, okay, fine, then it was unbelievable attention and love and compliments and everything else. We really did begin to develop some routines together. So our second sort of argument was driving to Virginia from DC, and I wanted to listen to music. And he's like, I don't listen to music. He does now. It was just quiet. And we had sort of stopped talking, and I was trying to think of things to talk about. It was just one of those weird things. And so I don't remember quite what made him angry, but it was something about me and can you listen to music? And I want to listen to music, and we listened to something, and he put news on. I want to listen to the news, so I turned it off. And it was just about the radio. It was something stupid. But again, he started to get really upset, and his voice got higher pitched and higher pitched and higher pitched. And I didn't know what to do. And I was like, we were upset and angry. And so we got to our hotel in Portsmouth, and I went and visited my dad. So I drove back and forth every day that we were there. But, I had a long visit and stayed for dinner on one day. And, but I didn't spend enough time visiting because I was heading back to Portsmouth. And I let them know I'm here with a friend, and my dad was sort of looking at me like, what's going on with you? But that was an important visit for us. It was actually my last in-person visit with my dad. And my biological dad, and he gave me this beautiful wooden box that was his. And he gave me a bunch of poetry he'd written in his Harvard, Yale, Oxford, Cambridge track and field suit. And he gave me all of these amazing things, which I, brought home with me. So we had our visit, and then Roy and I did a bunch of sightseeing and visiting all around Portsmouth, Virginia, and we went out for dinner, and we had a wonderful time. And then I flew home. We really did establish at this point that our plan was once his divorce was final, then we would really look at my situation, never knowing what would happen to me. As spring went along, our visits continued, and I look back now, I don't know how I was away all that I was. We had a lot of just visits that were a day-long visit. He would come up here to Concord. He would have things to do in Concord, and he would get a hotel, and we would see one another. And I remember running the Rocket Race, and this is a race. There's all these live bands along the course, and it raises money for the Payson Center for Cancer Care. And so this band played on his porch. And actually, one of the pictures in the graphics for this season, I'm standing like this, sort of tilting my head to the side with a bib number on. And that was in 2010, and we ran the race. And Gracie and Molly ran the race as well. I didn't see Roy at all in the race. I ran the whole thing by myself. We finished the race, got my car, and I drove back up there. And we were dancing to the band, and I ended up having my picture in the paper. So I was in my car with the girls in the Jeep. Roy was at the car talking to us, and Gracie and Molly were talking, and Kenny had the bending truck, and he went zooming by really close. I'm like, oh boy, I think he's upset. I think he's mad. I came home, and Kenny and I had a horrible fight. He was super angry. That was what the year was like. So we're balancing this line where we want everyone to think nothing is going on, obviously. We haven't made this big jump, and we're doing these things together. So that fight that Kenny and I had in May was big. And the thing I remember most is Gracie and Molly it was the first time they'd really seen us fight in this way, I think. Gracie said, but you're mad at mommy? And Kenny's like, yes. And Gracie's like, do you love mommy? And Kenny said, no. And Gracie just melted. Oh my God, I've never seen it. It was horrible. And so I grabbed Gracie and just got so angry at Kenny. Like, you can be mad at me, you can say, but you don't tell your child. It was a horrible, horrible fight. And the three of us slept in here. And then, these things would work out. It was beginning to become an issue. And then summer came. And so I had a dance competition over the 4th of July. And I went with my dance team, but I didn't stay the whole time with them. I spent a ton of it with Roy. And the town that he lived in had this unbelievable 4th of July celebration. And the fireworks, and there was this art festival and parade, like all these amazing, oh my gosh, it was a blast. We had so much fun. I went swimming in the ocean and running. We just did all of these things. He just always put together an amazing time. And he would say, let me just be your little escape. Let me be your escape. Let me be the part of your life that makes you happy. And he was. And we spent a ton of time together. So that is sort of how 2009 to 2010 panned out. I was teaching full time at the high school. I was coaching 3 seasons. Another big thing in May was his divorce hearing. I don't know how I could have left that out. And I had to miss 2 days of school to do it. And my personal days weren't approved. And so I said, then I'll take doc pay. And so at that time, so I missed a track meet. During the divorce hearing, I was testifying. So I was facing the court and Roy was sitting in the front row and Robert was behind him. And it was 2 full days of testimony that I sat through. And then it was my turn to testify. And I just had to talk about that Amy had brought the police in and it was around the children and things that she said Roy had done to the children and all of this. And so I'm giving my testimony and Robert is so angry. He's like clenching his fists. He's getting all mad. And he actually had to be removed from the courtroom. And Roy didn't see any of this because Robert was sitting behind him. But I'm watching him. So I should have gone to my track meet, but I didn't. We went to dinner and all this, and it was just 2 intense days. And then like another 2 months went by. But my school situation was getting problematic, I believe. I think that Amy had connections because all of a sudden I started having these complaints that didn't make sense, that I was talking about things, inappropriate things in the classroom around a relationship I was having. Okay, I never talked about Roy to my students at all. A student that I now know was very connected to Amy and to Teresa said that I was jumping up and down in a window and waving at somebody. Well, I was waving at Kenny. We were on the phone and then he drove by. So I waved at him, he waved back. I had those big glass windows. So I got called into like a meeting, just said, when they were like, we're worried about you. We heard this. We have a student that complained. And so the whole jumping up and down in front of the window, I had a student teacher with me. It was a completely different period of the day. This event happened. And the student that complained about it wasn't even in that class. And so I realized now that I was being harassed in a very bad way. In the winter, after that first nasty behavior from Bob continually, he started doing things like just started being more harassing. And Amy also started being harassing. And our mutual friend in the church came to me and said, I'm really concerned. Amy is making threats that she's going to, throw bricks at your house, that, you better keep an eye on your kids. Like really scary stuff I started hearing from very credible people. This was in the winter. So I'd never gotten a restraining order. I didn't even know what to do. So Roy helped me. Again, I said that he had used everything I used was on school district email, which is public email. The principal at Kimball School at the time, she said, do all of this on public email because then you can always find it. And the school district will know what's going on. And so I did. Everything relating to this was on that email. So Roy helped me. I made my case and I had all these piles of paper. I realize now that judges don't want to look at piles of paper in a restraining order hearing. They want you to take the statute and speak to how the behavior of the person goes against the statute. But I had Roy helping me, and he was the restraining order king is what I call him now, what he does. We spent hours in my classroom at Concord High School, photocopying and, all of this at school, making copies of things so that the judge could have a copy and Amy had a copy. And so we went and we did the restraining order hearing. So she was furious with me. And the mistake I made is I kept her folder of stuff that she had given and I let her keep mine. I should have said, could I please have the emails back? And I let her keep them. And it was the school district letterhead. And so this would come back to haunt me in the summer. I had this traumatic thing. I did not get the restraining order. And I was communicating at this time, I believe I was communicating at this time with Teresa through the mutual friend at church. I remember having Roy meet her. I'm calling her Mary. We met at the coffee shop. He cried because he was, he said he was so worried about Teresa and he wanted to make sure she was okay. He was seeing Morgan already, so he was feeling a bit better about that. We had this whole long visit. And in one of my Boston visits, Mary called me from youth group and Teresa was there. And I handed the phone to Roy. And it was the first time that he had heard Teresa's voice in like a year and a half. This was also going on. So it was all this sort of love bombing and romance and everything's going to be fine. And then me just going out on a limb again and again and again to help him with the kids. And I really firmly believe now that there was communication, that he was sharing things about the nature of our relationship. I can't imagine it. She just knew too many things. We didn't get the restraining order. And I remember Teresa sharing that she jumped all around, visitations and the trips to the museums and all of that. And there was also all of the court hearings and the number of times I went to court. So at the end of 2010, when I'm getting in trouble at school now, I had this whole meeting and I had a union rep there, gave my side of the story. And I remember Jean Connolly at this time was still on my side. And he said, we just want you to be happy. And we realize you're sort of falling apart. Like, what's going on here? And I cried and cried. Now, we were having all these IRS issues. I thought I was going to lose my house. The money situation in my house was tanking drastically bad. I ended up taking the rest of the school year off. Track was over, and I took the rest of the school year off and had a substitute come in, and I took a medical leave. And I had plenty of sick time. So I didn't teach from like the whole month of June. And I was doing a lot of therapy with Judy, my therapist in Exeter. I look back on it now and watch that year of my life as a spectator. So here I am in the summer of 2009, on top of it professionally, just finished my sabbatical year, putting together a presentation to Charlotte School Board, which I never did. I was just so distracted. The summer of 2010, when everything is really, really chaotic, full of drama, not my drama. I have been accused many times by both Amy and Roy for being the drama queen. My problem is I'm just willing to jump into other people's. And this was a drama-filled situation. The divorce was contentious. I had this amazing 4th of July vacation, but things in my house are falling apart. I had track camp. Track camp went fine. I remember organizing track camp, being overwhelmed with everything that was going on. It was a very, very emotionally charged year where I dove into this relationship and dove into helping Roy to get his furniture back and to get time with his children back. That was it. That was what I did. And I had to have a restraining order and go to a restraining order hearing. And, Robert was just harassing my family. That got worse and worse. And I'll get into that as we go along. So I'll end here now. So, I'm owning my peace. I made the choice. I chose to enter into a relationship with him. I chose to go to these court hearings. I chose to do it all. I wasn't forced or coerced in an obvious way. Looking at what's happened since and being able to watch Roy and how he interacts and behaves as somebody that's on the losing end or the other side, I realize now how gullible I am. And I've done it again and again. And I apologize if this is too personal and uncomfortable. I think infidelities and marriage troubles are not unique to me. Thank you for listening. Be good to yourself and be good to someone else. And as always, have a good day, everybody. Hey, thanks for listening and for supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and to share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories. I love connecting with my listeners. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at Barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.